The phone rang at 9:43 in the morning. I remember the exact time because I had just glanced at the kitchen clock, wondering if it was too early to call my friend Dot about our lunch plans. The autumn sunlight was streaming through the window above the sink, catching the dust motes floating in the air, and for a moment, everything felt perfectly ordinary. Then the phone rang, and ordinary ended. My name is Frances Lewis. I'm 62 years old, a retired elementary school teacher, and a widow of 3 years. My husband Edward passed away from a heart attack on a Tuesday afternoon while watering the garden he loved so much. Since then, I've lived alone in this house we shared for 34 years, surrounded by his photographs and the roses he planted that still bloom every spring without him. I picked up the phone on the third ring. "Mrs. Lewis?" A man's voice, professional but tense. "This is Morris Harrison from First National Bank. I'm calling about a rather sensitive situation." My heart picked up speed. Banks don't call at 9:43 in the morning to wish you a pleasant day. Banks call when there's trouble. "What kind of situation?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. There was a pause, the kind of pause that tells you someone is choosing their words very carefully. "Your daughter-in-law is here at the bank," he said, "with a man who appears to be identical to your son." I laughed. It was a short, nervous laugh, the kind that escapes before you can stop it. "That's impossible," I said. "My son Nathan is in Chicago on a business trip. He's been there since Monday." Another pause, longer this time. "Mrs. Lewis," Mr. Harrison said, his voice dropping lower, "I strongly suggest you come to the bank immediately. There are things here that don't add up, and I think you need to see them for yourself." I stood in my kitchen for a full minute after hanging up, staring at the phone as if it might ring again and someone would say, "Sorry, wrong number, our mistake." It didn't happen. The drive to the bank took 12 minutes. I know because I counted every red light, every turn signal, every second that brought me closer to something I couldn't yet name. I had put on my gray cardigan before leaving, not because it was cold outside, but because I felt cold inside, a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn weather. First National Bank looked the same as always, the same brick facade, the same glass doors, the same American flag snapping in the breeze. I had been coming here for 40 years, since Edward and I opened our first joint account as newlyweds. Nothing about it had ever frightened me before. Today, my hands trembled as I pushed through the entrance. The security guard looked at me twice before asking for my ID, not with suspicion, but with a strange curiosity, as if he already knew who I was before I said my name. "I'm here about a phone call," I said. "Frances Lewis." A young woman at the counter looked up immediately, nodding as if she had been waiting for exactly those words. "Please follow me, Mrs. Lewis." We walked down a narrow hallway to a small office with frosted glass walls. There sat the man from the phone call, Morris Harrison, according to the nameplate on his desk. He had a pale face and fingers interlaced with a rigidity that isn't taught in customer service training. "Thank you for coming so quickly," he said. "Please have a seat." I sat. My heart was pounding, but when I spoke, my voice came out firm. "Where is my daughter-in-law?" Mr. Harrison exchanged a glance with a younger woman standing by the window. Then he stood and walked to the frosted glass. "Before I answer that," he said quietly, "I need you to see something." He opened the blinds just barely, not enough for anyone outside to see us, but enough for me to look into the main lobby. And there she was. Brianna sat in front of a manager's desk, her posture perfect, her designer purse resting on her lap the way she always held it. Her honey blonde hair was styled just so, her makeup flawless. She looked calm, confident, like a woman who had done this 100 times. Standing beside her was a man. It wasn't the resemblance that knocked the wind out of me. It was the precision, the height, the broad shoulders, the way he tilted his head slightly when listening to someone speak. The automatic gesture of touching his chin with his fingers while waiting for an answer. That gesture. Nathan had done that since he was a boy. I used to tease him about it when he was studying for tests in high school, chin in hand, eyes focused on his textbook. "You look like a little professor," I would say, and he would grin at me, embarrassed. The man in the lobby did the same thing. Exactly the same thing. My legs went weak, and I had to grip the edge of the chair to keep from sliding to the floor. "It can't be," I whispered. "We thought the same thing," Mr. Harrison replied. "But there are details that don't match." I wanted to ask what details, but I couldn't take my eyes off that scene. Brianna was smiling naturally. The man beside her nodded along to whatever the manager was saying, comfortable, relaxed, too comfortable, too relaxed, like someone who had rehearsed this performance more than once. "They're trying to complete a significant transaction," Mr. Harrison continued. "Changes to account access, signature authorizations. The woman presented herself as authorized by you, and the gentleman claims to be your son." "My son is on a trip," I repeated, more to convince myself than to inform him. "That's what she told us too," added the woman by the window. "She said you could not come in person and that they had your full authorization." Authorization. The word fell with a different weight now. I thought about all the times I had signed documents without reading every line, trusting that Brianna knew what she was doing. I thought about how many times she had said, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll handle everything." And I had stepped aside gratefully, relieved to let someone else manage the complicated things. "What do you want me to do?" I asked finally. Mr. Harrison looked at me with careful eyes. "For now, nothing. Just observe. We've paused the transaction, citing a routine verification process. They don't know we've contacted you." I understood then what he wasn't saying. This hadn't started today. No one walks into a bank to fake an identity without preparation. No one imitates gestures, learns responses, rehearses mannerisms by accident. Someone had studied my son. Someone had learned his way of moving through the world. And someone, I looked at Brianna through the glass, at her patient smile, her relaxed shoulders, had given them the opportunity to do it. "I want to leave," I said, "and I don't want them to know I was here." Mr. Harrison nodded without surprise. "That's the most prudent approach for now. We'll be in touch." I left the bank through a side door, emerging into an alley that smelled of old brick and fallen leaves. The noise of traffic and other people's conversations hit me with an almost offensive normality. Everyone else's world was still turning the way it always had. Mine had just tilted on its axis. I walked 2 blocks without feeling my feet. I sat on a bench in the small park across from the post office, the same bench where I used to wait for Nathan when he was a boy, watching him run toward me after school with his backpack bouncing against his shoulders. I took a deep breath and tried to organize my thoughts. Fact, my son Nathan was supposed to be in Chicago. He had called me just last night, his voice tired, saying the meetings were running long. I had no reason to doubt him. Fact, my daughter-in-law Brianna was in the bank right now with a man who looked exactly like Nathan, but was not Nathan. Fact, they were trying to access accounts that had my name on them. I pulled out my phone. There was a message from Nathan, sent 30 minutes ago. "Mom, I'm going to be in meetings all day. We'll call tonight." I read it twice. The words sounded hollow now, like an old recording. Was he really in Chicago? Or had someone learned to text like him, too? I put the phone away without replying. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to reassure my son. I needed to understand before speaking. I needed to see clearly before acting. I walked home slowly, every step a conscious effort not to accelerate, not to let anxiety push me into clumsy decisions. When I entered the house, the silence wrapped around me like a familiar blanket. I set my purse on the table and stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the furniture I had chosen decades ago, the family photographs arranged with care. In one frame, Nathan and Brianna on their wedding day 5 years ago, she smiling radiantly, he with that expression of his, half nervous, half proud. At what moment had I stopped looking closely? I sat down and opened the drawer where I kept important documents, certificates, receipts, bank statements. Everything seemed to be in order. Too much in order. Then I noticed what was missing. My state ID wasn't in the folder where I always kept it. Neither was my passport. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't panic, at least not the way I would have before today. I closed the drawer carefully and went to the bedroom. I checked the closet, the high shelves, the box where I keep old papers. What I found made my blood run cold. Copies. Good copies. Scanned recently. Printed on high-quality paper. My name, my photo, my signature. Everything was there. Everything except one thing. The history. No one can copy decades of memories. No one can memorize an entire life without making a mistake. I remembered then small scenes I had ignored. Brianna asking for my exact date of birth for some paperwork. Brianna casually inquiring about my mother's maiden name. Brianna offering to keep my documents safe so they don't get lost. At the time, it seemed like care. Now I understood it was also surveillance. The doorbell rang and I nearly jumped out of my skin. It was Dot. Dorothy Patterson, my neighbor of 20 years and friend for even longer. She entered with her usual energy, talking before the door was even closed. "I saw you leave early this morning, looking white as a sheet. What's going on, Frances?" I looked at her. This woman who had survived 2 husbands, 3 surgeries, and 40 years as a nurse in the county hospital. If anyone would believe me without thinking I was crazy, it was Dot. I didn't tell her everything. Not yet, but I told her enough. "Something's not right with Brianna," I said quietly, "and maybe with Nathan's name being used without his knowledge." Dot frowned, her sharp eyes studying my face. "When something doesn't add up, my friend, it's because someone is cooking the books behind your back." "I went to the bank today," I said. "I saw things I can't explain yet." "Then you're not crazy," she replied without hesitation. "If the bank noticed something, there's movement. And where there's movement, there's a trail." Her simple, direct words returned a little solid ground beneath my feet. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't exaggerating. "Don't do anything yet," she added, taking my hand. "Just watch. Whoever's lying will make a mistake. They always do." I walked her to the door, and when she left, I sat down again in the quiet of my living room. I thought about calling Nathan. I even dialed his number, but I hung up before it rang. No, not yet. Instead, I pulled out an old notebook and began to write. Dates, phrases, small details that only Nathan would know, that only someone who had lived with him for 35 years could remember. The nickname I called him when he was little. My little man, never Nate or Jay. The name of the dog we had when he was 7 years old. Rusty, not Toby or Max. The scar on his left knee and how he got it. Chasing a red ball in the park, not playing soccer at school. The song we used to sing in the car on road trips. The name of the first friend he ever brought home. Lived memory, not learned data. If someone was using my son's face to move papers and money, I was going to use his truth to stop them. When night fell, the phone vibrated. Brianna's name on the screen. "Mom," she said, her voice sweet as honey. "I went by the bank today to handle some account stuff. Just wanted to let you know everything's fine." I closed my eyes for a second before answering. "That's great, Brianna," I said calmly. "Thanks for letting me know." "Sleep well, Mom." "You too, dear." I hung up with a steady hand. She believed I knew nothing. She believed I was still the woman who signed without reading and trusted without asking. That was her first mistake. I looked at myself in the hallway mirror, studying my own reflection. The gray hair, the lines around my eyes, the face of a woman who had spent too long being agreeable. I didn't see a victim. I saw someone awake. And that night, as I turned off the lights and lay in bed, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't just about money or documents. Someone was trying to erase me from my own life, and I was not going to let them. I didn't sleep well that night, but it wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was something sharper, a clarity that hummed through my mind like electricity through old wires. By 6 a.m, I was already at the kitchen table with my coffee, the notebook open in front of me. I had made a list during the night, writing by the glow of my bedside lamp while the rest of the world slept. Things only Nathan would know. I read through them again, adding details as they surfaced from the deep well of 35 years of motherhood. The way he cried for a week when Rusty died. Not just tears, but that silent, shoulder-shaking grief that children feel when they lose their first friend. The time he broke his arm falling from the oak tree in the backyard and told the doctor, "Don't worry about me, just make sure my mom's okay," because he'd seen my face go white when I heard the crack. The song we always sang on road trips, "You Are My Sunshine." He would harmonize on the second verse, his little voice wobbling but determined. The name of his first real friend, Timothy Brooks, a skinny kid with big glasses who moved away when they were both 9. Nathan still mentioned him sometimes. These weren't facts you could find in a document. These were memories written in the invisible ink of shared life. I closed the notebook and looked out the window at Edward's garden. The roses were fading now, dropping their petals onto the grass like small surrenders. I wondered what my husband would say if he were here. Would he be proud of me for staying calm? Or would he tell me I was overreacting? Then again, Edward had his own secrets. I was learning that now. Mid-morning, I found myself in the attic. I'm not sure what drew me up there. Maybe it was instinct, the sense that answers hide in forgotten places. Or maybe it was simply that I had avoided this space since Edward died, unable to face the boxes of his belongings that I had packed away but never sorted through. The attic smelled like dust and old wood, and the particular mustiness of things left too long in the dark. I pulled the cord for the single hanging bulb, and pale yellow light filled the narrow space. Edward's boxes were stacked in the corner, still taped shut. I had written his name on each one in black marker, as if labeling them would somehow contain my grief. I opened the first box. Old tax returns, business cards from jobs he'd held decades ago, a broken watch I had given him for our 10th anniversary. The second box held photographs, hundreds of them, loose and scattered, from before the digital age when we printed everything. Our wedding, Nathan as a baby, vacations I had almost forgotten. The third box was smaller, tucked behind the others as if someone had deliberately hidden it. Inside, I found letters. They were tied together with a faded blue ribbon, the paper yellowed at the edges. The handwriting wasn't Edward's. It was feminine, looping, careful. I untied the ribbon with trembling fingers and unfolded the first letter. My dearest Edward, I know you can't leave her. I've accepted that. But please don't forget about us. Don't forget about him. He has your eyes, you know. Every time I look at him, I see you. Forever yours, Margaret. My heart stopped. I read the letter again, then again, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. But they didn't. They stayed exactly as they were, a confession from beyond the grave. There were more letters, dozens of them, spanning years, and tucked among them, a photograph. A woman I had never seen before, pretty in a tired way, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. On the back, written in Edward's handwriting, Derek, born March 15th, 1989, 1 year after Nathan. I sat on the dusty floor of the attic, surrounded by the debris of my husband's secret life, and felt something inside me crack open. Edward had had another child, a son named Derek Holloway, taking the mother's last name, because of course he couldn't carry Lewis. A son who would now be 36 years old. A son who, if he had inherited Edward's genes the way Nathan had, might look almost identical to my boy. Not a stranger imitating Nathan. A brother. The pieces fell into place with horrible precision. Derek and Nathan shared a father. That's why the resemblance was so exact. The same height, the same build, the same gestures. DNA doesn't lie, even when husbands do. But how had Brianna found him? How long had this been planned? I wiped my eyes. I hadn't even realized I was crying, and gathered the letters carefully. I didn't feel anger toward Edward. Not yet. That would come later, I knew, in waves I couldn't predict. Right now, I felt something more immediate, understanding. Derek Holloway had grown up without a father, watching from the outside while Nathan had everything he didn't. The family name, the inheritance, the mother who stayed. Was that why he was doing this? Not just for money, but for revenge? I climbed down from the attic with the box of letters under my arm. The house felt different now, haunted by a past I had never known existed. The doorbell rang just as I reached the bottom of the stairs. For a wild moment, I thought it might be Derek himself, come to confront me. But when I opened the door, I found only a plain envelope on the welcome mat. No return address, no postmark. Someone had delivered it by hand. Inside was a stack of papers, bank documents, transaction records, handwritten notes. I recognized Brianna's handwriting immediately. She had always had that distinctive way of writing her capital letters, with little flourishes that she probably thought looked elegant. The notes detailed a plan. Dates, amounts, account numbers, a timeline for transferring assets. And at the bottom of the last page, a single line. D will handle the rest. D. Derek. My hands shook as I spread the papers across the kitchen table. Someone had given me evidence. Someone wanted me to know what was happening. But who? I called the lawyer that afternoon, Adriana Powers, the one Dot had recommended months ago when I mentioned needing to update my will. I hadn't followed through then. I wished I had. Adriana's office was downtown in one of those old buildings with creaky elevators and frosted glass doors. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a firm handshake. "Tell me the facts," she said after I sat down. "Not suspicions, facts." So I told her. The bank, the man who looked like Nathan, Brianna's calm smile, the missing documents, the copies, the letters in the attic, the envelope delivered to my door. Adriana listened without interrupting, making precise notes in a leather-bound notebook. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me. "This isn't a misunderstanding, Mrs. Lewis," she said. "This is identity theft, organized, premeditated, and probably months in the making. The good news is, you caught it before they finished. The bad news is, we need to be very careful about how we proceed." "What do you mean?" "I mean, don't confront anyone. Don't alert them. Document everything. The bank has already flagged the transaction, which buys us time. I'll contact them directly to establish verification protocols. And you," she looked at me steadily, "you need to be the person who knows everything and shows nothing." I nodded slowly. It wasn't my nature to be secretive. I had spent my whole life being open, being trusting, being the woman who believed the best about everyone. That woman had almost been erased. "There's something else," Adriana added. "If the imposter is well trained, he'll fail in the things that can't be learned. Memories, spontaneous reactions. That's where you're key. You're the only one who can prove who your real son is." That evening, Brianna called again. "Mom, how are you feeling?" Her voice was warm, concerned, exactly the voice of a loving daughter-in-law checking on her elderly mother-in-law. "I worry about you all alone in that big house." "I'm fine, dear," I said, keeping my tone light. "Just a quiet day. How is Nathan? Where is he staying again?" A tiny pause, almost imperceptible. "Oh, you know, the usual place." "The one by the park or the one on the avenue?" I asked the question casually, as if it barely mattered. But I knew the answer. I knew it because I had booked Nathan's hotel twice myself when I helped him plan work trips years ago. He always stayed at the Marriott by Lincoln Park, never anywhere on the avenue. "The one on the avenue," Brianna said. Wrong. I made a mental note and kept talking, asking about her day, her plans for the weekend, whether she needed anything from the store. Normal questions, safe questions. The kind of questions a trusting mother-in-law would ask. After I hung up, I wrote in my notebook, "Brianna doesn't know where Nathan actually stays when he travels. A wife should know that. Unless she had stopped paying attention to her husband long ago, unless she had other things on her mind." The next morning, I returned to the bank. This time, Adriana came with me. We met with Camila Torres, the bank's legal counsel, a composed woman with silver-streaked hair and the kind of calm that comes from handling crises for a living. "We've frozen all activity on the flagged accounts," Camila explained. "No transactions will be processed until we complete verification. Mrs. Lewis, I have to ask, are you willing to participate in a formal review? It would involve all parties being present." "You mean Brianna and the man?" "Yes. We'll ask a series of questions, some factual, some personal. The goal is to establish consistency. If there are discrepancies, they'll become apparent." I looked at Adriana, who nodded slightly. "I'll do it," I said. "When?" "We've already reached out to Mrs. Brianna Lewis. She agreed immediately, said she wants to clear up this misunderstanding." I almost smiled. Of course she did. In her mind, she had prepared for everything. She had coached Derek on Nathan's life, taught him the facts, rehearsed the answers. But she couldn't teach him the things that lived only in my heart. The meeting was scheduled for the following afternoon. I spent the night before reading through my notebook, adding details, whispering them to myself like prayers. My little man. Rusty. The red ball in the park. You are my sunshine. Timothy Brooks. These were my weapons. Small, invisible, deadly to anyone trying to pretend they were something they weren't. When I arrived at the bank the next day, dressed simply in my navy blouse and gray slacks, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not fear, not anger. Power. The meeting room was large, with a long table and tall windows that let in the gray autumn light. I sat on one side with Adriana. Across from us sat Brianna, her smile firmly in place, and beside her, Derek. Seeing him up close was different than watching through frosted glass. The resemblance to Nathan was still striking, almost painful, but there was something else in his eyes. Not cruelty, not arrogance. Curiosity. He was looking at me the way someone looks at a person they've heard about their whole life but never met. Camila Torres began the proceedings with crisp professionalism. We'll be asking a series of verification questions. There are no right or wrong answers, only consistent or inconsistent ones. Let's begin. She turned to Derek first. Can you tell us the nickname your mother called you when you were a child? Derek smiled. Nathan's smile, almost exactly. She called me Jay. My heart clenched, but I kept my face neutral. Camila looked at me. Mrs. Lewis? I called my son my little man, I said quietly. Never Jay. Not once in 35 years. Something flickered across Derek's face. He covered it quickly. Mom sometimes forgets things, Brianna said smoothly. She's getting older. Let's continue, Camila interrupted. The name of the dog you had when you were 7 years old? Toby, Derek answered. Rusty, I said. His name was Rusty. He slept under the dining room table every night, and when he died, Nathan cried for a week. I held him every night until he fell asleep. Derek's jaw tightened. Brianna shifted in her seat. One more question, Camila said. The scar on your left knee, how did you get it? This time Derek glanced at Brianna. Just for a second, just long enough for everyone to see. Playing soccer at school, he said. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I was back in that park 28 years ago. Nathan was 7, chasing a red ball across the grass, laughing the way only children laugh, wild and free and unafraid. Then he fell. The crack of his knee against the concrete. The blood. His face, not crying yet, just shocked. And his voice, small but brave. Don't be scared, Mom. I'm okay. I opened my eyes. He fell in the park, I said softly. Chasing a red ball. I carried him to the car and drove to the emergency room. He held my hand the whole time and told me not to worry. He was 7 years old and he was comforting me. The room went silent. Derek was staring at the table now, his hands flat against the surface. Brianna's smile had finally cracked. This is ridiculous, she started. You can't possibly— Enough! Derek's voice cut through the room like a blade, low, tired, final. He looked up, not at Brianna, not at the lawyers, at me. This wasn't my idea, he said. This wasn't my idea. The words hung in the air like smoke after a fire. No one moved. No one spoke. Brianna turned to Derek, her face draining of color. Shut up, she hissed. What are you doing? But Derek wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at me, this woman he had never met, the wife of the father who had abandoned him, the mother of the brother who got everything he didn't. I said enough. His voice was quiet but steady. It's over, Brianna. She grabbed his arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his sleeve. We talked about this. We planned everything. You can't just— I can. He pulled his arm away and stood up. And I am. Camila Torres raised her hand, signaling to someone outside the room. Within seconds, 2 security officers appeared at the door. Mrs. Brianna Lewis, Camila said, her voice professionally calm. This meeting is being recorded. Based on the inconsistencies presented today and she glanced at Derek. This gentleman's statement, we will be filing a formal report with local authorities. You are advised to seek legal counsel. Brianna's composure finally shattered. Tears streamed down her face. Real tears or performed ones, I couldn't tell anymore. Maybe she couldn't either. You don't understand, she said, her voice cracking. Nathan is never home. He's always working, always traveling. I was alone. Derek understood me. He listened to me. We were just trying to steal, I said. My voice surprised me. It was calm, clear, not the voice of a victim. You were trying to steal my name, my accounts, my son's identity. You can dress it up however you want, Brianna, but that's what this is. She stared at me as if seeing me for the first time. Not the agreeable mother-in-law who signed papers without reading. Not the lonely widow who was grateful for company. Someone else entirely. Francis, Don't! I held up my hand. We're done talking. The security officers escorted Brianna out of the room. She looked back once, her mascara running, her perfect image finally ruined. I felt no satisfaction in it, only exhaustion. Derek hadn't moved. He stood by the window, his back to the room, staring out at the gray sky. Mr. Holloway, Camila said, you'll need to provide a full statement. Your cooperation will be noted in the investigation." He nodded without turning around. I should have left then. I should have walked out with Adriana, gone home, poured myself a glass of wine, and tried to forget this nightmare. Instead, I stayed. "Could you give us a moment?" I asked Camilla. She hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. I'll be right outside." The door clicked shut, and it was just the two of us, me and this stranger who shared my husband's blood. Derek finally turned around. Up close, the resemblance to Nathan was almost unbearable. The same jaw, the same brow, even the same slight asymmetry in his smile that I had always found endearing in my son. But his eyes were different. Nathan's eyes held warmth, optimism, the confidence of someone who had always been loved. Derek's eyes held something else, something older, harder, loss. "You knew," I said quietly. "You knew who Edward was, who Nathan was." Derek's jaw tightened. "I found out when I was 18. My mother told me on her deathbed. She gave me his name, told me he had another family. A real family, she called it." He laughed bitterly. "As if we weren't real." "I didn't know about you," I said. "Edward never told me." Would it have mattered if he had? The question hit harder than I expected. Would it have mattered? Would I have reached out to this boy, this child my husband had fathered with another woman? Or would I have done what was easier, ignored it, pretended it didn't exist, protected my own family at the expense of his? I didn't know the answer, and that uncertainty shamed me. "How did Brianna find you?" I asked instead. Derek walked to the table and sat down heavily, as if the weight of everything had finally caught up with him. "Social media," he said. "About 2 years ago. She sent me a message, said she knew about my lost inheritance, said she could help me get what was rightfully mine." He shook his head. I was angry. I'd been angry my whole life. Here was someone offering me a chance to take back what my father owed me, so I said yes. And the rest? Learning to move like Nathan? To gesture like him? Brianna had videos, photos. She studied him like a textbook and taught me everything. She said it would be easy. "You were old," she said. "Trusting. You wouldn't notice." The words stung, but I didn't flinch. "She was wrong," I said. Derek met my eyes. "I know. I realized that the moment I sat in this room and watched you answer those questions. You weren't confused. You weren't fooled. You knew exactly who your son was, down to the last detail." He paused, and something in his expression shifted, softened just slightly. "My mother never knew those things about me," he said quietly. "She loved me, but she was tired, working 3 jobs, barely surviving. She didn't have time to remember what nickname she called me or what song we sang in the car. We never had a car." I felt my throat tighten. "Derek, I'm not asking for sympathy." His voice hardened again. "I made my choices. I'll live with them. But you should know, I'm the one who sent you that envelope." The breath caught in my chest. "What?" "The bank documents. Brianna's notes. I put them under your door 3 days ago." I stared at him, trying to reconcile this confession with everything else. "Why?" Derek stood up and walked back to the window. For a long moment, he didn't speak. When he did, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I sat in that bank, pretending to be your son, and I realized something. I didn't want Nathan's identity. I didn't want to be him. I wanted to be seen as myself. Derek Holloway. Not a shadow. Not a copy. Me." He turned to face me. I couldn't stop what I'd started. I was too deep in, and Brianna, she doesn't give up easily, but I could give you a chance to stop it. So I did. I didn't know what to say. This man had tried to steal my son's name, my family's money, my entire identity. And yet, in the end, he had also saved me. "The police will want to know about the envelope," I said finally. "I know. I'll tell them. It might help your case. Cooperation, remorse." Derek shrugged. "Maybe. I'm not counting on mercy, Mrs. Lewis. I've never had much luck with that." I stood up, smoothing my blouse, gathering myself. At the door, I paused. "For what it's worth," I said, "Edward was wrong to leave you. Wrong to pretend you didn't exist. That wasn't fair to you or your mother. And I'm sorry you grew up carrying that weight." Derek's eyes widened slightly as if he hadn't expected those words. "I'm not forgiving what you did," I continued. But I understand why you were angry, and I hope someday you find a way to build a life that's actually yours, not stolen, not borrowed. Yours. I left before he could respond. Nathan arrived that evening. He had caught the first flight out of Chicago after I finally called him, my voice steady despite everything. "Mom, what's going on?" he had asked, panic rising in his voice. "Brianna isn't answering her phone. The bank left me 3 messages. What happened?" "Come home," I said. "I'll explain everything." Now he stood in my living room, his suitcase still by the door, his face pale with shock. I had told him all of it. The call, the imposter, Brianna's betrayal, and the truth about his father. When I mentioned Derek, his half-brother, Nathan sat down hard on the couch, as if his legs had given out. "Dad had another son," he said, his voice hollow. "All those years and he never said anything?" "No, he didn't." "Did you know? Did you suspect?" I shook my head. "I thought I knew your father completely. I was wrong." Nathan buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook, and I realized he was crying. Not the loud, dramatic sobs of a child, but the quiet, devastating tears of a grown man whose world had just collapsed. I sat beside him and put my arm around his shoulders, the way I used to when he was small, and the world seemed too big and too frightening. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have seen it. Should have noticed something was wrong with Brianna. But I was always working, always traveling. I left everything to her. I left you to her." "You trusted your wife," I said. "That's not a crime." But I stopped paying attention. To her, to you, to everything that mattered. He looked up at me, his eyes red. "How do I fix this, Mom?" I took his hand, my son's hand, rough and warm and real. "You start by being present," I said. "You start by asking questions instead of assuming everything is fine. And you start by understanding that trust has to be earned, not given away like spare change." He nodded slowly. "What about Derek?" he asked after a long silence. "He's my brother." I had been thinking about that question all day, about the man who had tried to steal everything from us and then handed us the key to stop him. "He made terrible choices," I said carefully, "but he also made one good one at the end. That doesn't erase what he did, but it means something. What you do with that is up to you. Do you think I should meet him? Talk to him?" I looked at my son, this man I had raised, whose first steps I had witnessed, whose tears I had dried, whose life I knew down to the smallest detail. "Not yet," he said. "Let the legal process finish. Let the dust settle. And then, maybe, if you want to. But Nathan," I squeezed his hand, "whatever you decide for yourself. Not for me, not for your father's memory, not for anyone else. For you." He nodded again, and something in his posture shifted. He sat up straighter. The shock was still there, but beneath it, I saw something else. Resolve. 6 months later, I sold the house, Edward's house, the house of secrets, and moved to a smaller apartment closer to downtown. Dot lives 2 streets away now. We have coffee every morning and complain about the news like proper old ladies. Nathan visits every weekend. The divorce from Brianna was finalized last month. She's facing criminal charges for fraud and identity theft. Her lawyer is negotiating a plea deal. Derek received a suspended sentence and probation, partly because he cooperated fully with the investigation. He's required to pay restitution. Not that there's much money to pay, but the principle matters. Nathan started exchanging messages with him a few weeks ago. Nothing heavy. Just small talk, testing the waters. I don't know if they'll ever be brothers in any real sense, but they're trying to figure out what they can be. One evening, Nathan called me. "Mom," he said, "Derek asked if he could meet you. Not to apologize. He says he knows that's not enough. He just wants to talk. He says he understands if you say no." I stood by the window of my new apartment, watching the city lights flicker to life. "Tell him not yet," I said. "But not never. I need more time." "That's fair," Nathan said. "I'll let him know." After I hung up, I caught my reflection in the window glass. An old woman with gray hair and lines around her eyes. But in those eyes, something had changed. I wasn't the woman who signed without reading anymore. I wasn't the widow who waited quietly in her empty house for someone else to fill the silence. I was Frances Lewis, mother, survivor, the author of my own story, and I was finally fully awake. If you're listening to this story and you felt something tighten in your chest, if you recognized yourself in Frances, in her trust, in her silence, I want you to know something. You are not overreacting. When something doesn't add up, when people ask you to sign without reading, when you feel like a guest in your own life, that feeling isn't drama. It's your intuition trying to protect you. Listen to it.